Hello and welcome to the Craft Beer Corner. For today's beer review, we are going to be doing a review of pale ales, but stepping up in intensity. So starting with a standard pale ale, then moving up to the higher ABV cousin, the India Pale Ale. Two different brewers in today's review. Both beers were sourced from Tavour. So we're going to be starting on the lighter end with a Pipeworks Brewing Company pale ale called Lizard King. They are based out of Chicago, Illinois. This one does clock in at 6% ABV, and it was brewed with Mosaic hops. For number two, the IPA of the bunch, this is Fort George Brewery's Crysknife IPA, 7.2%. They are based in Astoria, Oregon, and this one was brewed with a blend of 5 different hops: Amarillo, Azacca, Cashmere, Citra, and Mosaic. So they do share one common trait in that they both are going to have Mosaic, but they ought to be quite a bit different beer drinking experiences. So I'm really excited to jump in. I love IPAs, I love pale ales, and having them back to back, you really get to see the difference between a standard and the bigger version, and kind of, it depends on your mood which you're going to go for. But without further ado, we're going to get things kicked off, starting with the Pipeworks Brewing Lizard King that clocks in at 6% ABV. Okay, so jumping right in with the first beer of today's pale ale review, we have got Pipeworks Brewing Company's Lizard King. This is the standard pale ale of the bunch, 6% ABV on this one, brewed with Mosaic hops specifically, and they are based in Chicago, Illinois. Okay, so first thing first, label art. This one is pretty intense. It's got what looks like Godzilla dressed in some kind of battle regalia fighting a skeleton. I'll try to angle that away from the set lights to give a decent chance of that being viewable, but it looks pretty gnarly. Nonetheless, we're going to get this one cracked and poured right in the glass. I got a nice tall all-purpose glass, gently. Okay, we'll just get this bad boy poured right in there. Looks quite nice. Looks very much like a classic pale ale appearance. I expect this is going to form a decent head. And indeed it did. All right, we'll just let that settle. Take a peek at this. Yeah, very classic pale ale color here. It's not dissimilar to the color of a Pilsner. It's a very light pale, hence pale ale. It is an ale and it is pale. So quite a nice looking beer in the glass. You can see that it formed a very thick, creamy, foamy head on top. And that just absolutely looks lovely. So let's get over for a sniff. Oh, that smells very nice. It smells very, very fruity. It smells very much like melons. That's the most pungent aroma that's coming through on the nose. I'm not really detecting any sense of the malt bill in there. And Mosaic hops are kind of known for imparting both blueberry aroma and flavors. I'm not really picking that up. I'm picking up very much melon. And it's very strong dominant melon. Maybe with some fresh herbs in there, almost like lemongrass and melons, like cantaloupe and honeydew, maybe even some kiwi with some lemongrass. That's what it smells like to me, but it smells delicious. It smells very fresh, very bright. And that head has already settled down a bit, but it's holding true. So let's jump right in. Okay, that's pretty hop dominant for a standard pale ale. I'll be perfectly honest, it is pretty hop dominant. In terms of the flavors that come through, it's got elements that remind you of the aroma come through in the flavor profile, but it's dominated with more of an earthy hop undertone to it than over abundance of fruit. And there is this slightly herbaceous quality to it as well. Like I mentioned, lemongrass. Lemongrass does kind of impart a lemon-like aroma and flavor to various cuisines. It could be food, it could be drink, it doesn't really matter. You could use it as a seasoning or ingredient for either or. But it's that herbaceous quality about the plant versus, juice or rind of a lemon or flesh of a lemon. So while it does have similarities, it's got a more earthy quality to it, which really helps kind of pair very well and accentuate with the kind of hop-centric nature that this pale ale has. This is quite a bit more hop dominant than your average pale ale, to be certain. And in fact, I've had many an IPA that I would say are far less hop dominant than this standard pale ale, but it's very nice. Really, it's about the ABV range more than anything that differentiates them. There's nothing that says you can't have a very hop dominant pale ale, and this one is clearly doing that. I'm going to jump in for a body and mouthfeel, explore its flavor development a bit more. The body on this is a solid medium, a very robust medium. It's got a lot more presence than you'd anticipate for just 6%. Mouthfeel, very much a classic pale ale. It's got a bit more resistance than you would expect for this ABV range as well, which is quite nice. I like a beer that has substance to it. It's not flat, it's not thin, it's not watery. It's got real substance. It's got presence on the palate. And if you agitate around the palate, it does get a little bit creamier. Not ridiculously, I wouldn't call it foamy or silky, but it does get a little creamier. A little bit more thickness is accentuated, that side of the mouthfeel, that viscosity, that thickness. It's quite enjoyable. In terms of how the flavors develop, the bulk of the intensity comes right up front as soon as you get it in your mouth and just peaks as soon as you swallow. But it does hold that peak for a good few seconds before it very quickly starts to die off. And everything you get up front is kind of where it goes following this bell curve, although it's a very quick ramp up and a pretty quick swoop down. In terms of the length of the finish, it's not super long. It doesn't have the same hop astringency where there's lingering big bold bitters all over the palate, but you can still taste them. And it is that underlying slight earthiness and that slight herbaceous quality that lingers to the end the most, but it finishes very clean. There's no hint of dryness to this beer at all. It's very wet, it's very round, it's very full, and it finishes very clean to the end, and it just kind of dissipates until it's gone. Overall, a nice finish, a nice drinking experience on each sip. In terms of the balance, for a pale ale, maybe a slightly different direction than your average pale ale, but the balance in it works very well. I like the intensity of the aroma, I like the intensity of the flavors, and I like how it's balanced with a malt bill, because while it is very hop dominant, you can still taste a very nice, classic, clean, very well built and put together pale ale malt bill underneath. And it really comes after about the 3-5 second mark and the hop intensity starts to get out of the way. That's when you, oh yeah, look at those malts, they're in there. And it just pairs beautifully. Very excellently balanced beer, very enjoyable. I'm going to take my time, sip on this, comment my scores. When we come back, we will get to the second beer of today's review. That is the India Pale Ale of the two, Fort George Brewery's Crysknife, and that one clocks in at 7.2% ABV. Okay, now jumping into the second beer of today's Pale Ale review, we're stepping it up a notch and jumping into the India Pale Ale territory. This specific beer is Fort George Brewery's Crysknife. Clocks in at 7.2% ABV. They are based out of Astoria, Oregon. It's got a blend of 5 different hops: Amarillo, Azacca, Cashmere, Citra, and Mosaic. So some big, bold hops here. And I don't know if it's named after maybe some use of cryo hops, but that is the name. It's kind of unique. Now, in terms of label art, it's also kind of unique. It's got a very brightly colored blue and pink hand gripping a knife. And it's on a very colorful green and yellow background. So hopefully the camera's picking that up, but it looks quite neat. Very first beer I've ever had by this brewer. IPA is one of my absolute top favorite styles of them all. And I love trying new beers from new brewers, as you know well by now. So without further ado, let's get this cracked gently. Okay. And poured right in the glass. Okay. So this did pour quite well, formed quite a nice head, and this is very hazy. I didn't know this was a hazy, but it is very much a classic hazy. It looks pretty much identical to the color of orange juice in a glass, and it is occluded just as a glass of juice would be. formed a very, very thick, lush, creamy head on top. Really did a great job forming a head poured at home. So let's give this a sniff. Okay, yeah, this smells very nice. This smells very fruity yet again. It smells like a mix of tropical fruit and citrus predominantly. There's little undercurrents of some earthiness, the slightest hint of pine, but overall it's very citrus and very tropical fruit dominant, at least on the aroma, and it smells absolutely fantastic. It smells so pungent. Yeah, that's just huge hop aroma. It smells so good. Head settled down just a bit. It's sitting at roughly about an inch, maybe 3/4 of an inch to an inch. So it's a bit thicker head than usual, but it's holding true. So I'm just going to dive right in and make a mess in my mustache. Let's do it. Oh, that's very nice. The hop flavors on this are perhaps a bit more subdued than I anticipated based on the pungency of the aroma. And not all the flavors are translated that match the aroma. So it's far more aromatic. So I'm assuming that they did a lot of dry hopping here. The flavor translates into nice fresh hop flavors, don't get me wrong. It tastes very nice. There's definitely a clear citrus side to this, a clear tropical fruit, though it's a little more citrus dominant than tropical fruit dominant in terms of flavor, and there is this underlying earthiness. So really everything that I did pick up in the aroma, I'm picking up in the flavor. The only thing I can say about it is the flavor intensity is not nearly as bold as the pungency of the aroma would suggest, but it's very nice. It's very enjoyable. It tastes very, very good. Additionally, the sense of hop bitterness is not particularly great in this beer. So this is not what I would call a hoppy IPA by any stretch of the imagination. Indeed, Pipeworks Lizard King we reviewed first was far more bitter than this beer, and that was just a standard pale ale. This is an India pale ale. This seems to be pushing more of the hop characteristic traits forward in aroma and flavor versus going in to extract alphas into the base beer to bitter it up. So yes, there are bitters, but it's very, very, very subtle. I've had stouts and porters that are more bitter than this beer, and that's not a knock on the beer. It tastes very, very good. But if you're craving bitters in an IPA, this is probably one to skip. If you're new to IPAs and you haven't really appreciated or don't really care for the bitter sense, but you're giving them a whirl, this would be one I would suggest because it plays up that fruity side far more than it does the hop bitter essence, but it tastes very, very nice. So let's jump in for body and mouthfeel. Body on this is a very strong medium on the border of medium, medium heavy. It's very nice. Feels perfectly appropriate to the ABV. It's what I anticipated. Mouthfeel. Mouthfeel, there is some definite resistance. This beer has real presence and there is viscosity to it. When you agitate around the palate, this one does get very thick and very creamy. It takes up even greater volume, so you could say it's creamy and voluminous at the same time. It's very, very nice. It feels very good on the palate. The weight and the mouthfeel are top notch. The flavors are really nice, though they are muted compared to the aroma. On second sip, I definitely got it right on the first sip, and it's not a knock on the beer by any stretch. What I'm tasting is very, very tasty. In terms of flavors, citrus, it's kind of a blend of multiple different citrus. I'm definitely getting some grapefruit. I'm definitely getting some type of orange, and there's even a subtle suggestion of kind of a mix of lemons and limes, and it's very underneath. It's very underneath. Now there is this slight earthy kind of side to it, and it's almost kind of similar to the first beer. There's an herbaceous side to the earthiness. So there is this earthy hop sense to it, but it's kind of herbaceous, and that's really what's blending with this lemon lime kind of side of the citrus fruit that are coming through. It's very, very nice. The flavors are good. In terms of the finish, this beer does not have a very long finish at all. It just doesn't have the hop intensity to push it out. What you get very much up front in the main intensity, and then it's gone very, very quickly. So this is not an IPA that has a very long finish. There's no lingering bitters on the back of the palate. It's just a very bright, fruity, fresh IPA, and I think that's what it's supposed to be. That's what they're trying to do with it, and if so, mission accomplished. So this is definitely one for people that like kind of the hazy thing, that are a little less bitter, intense forward, and focus more on the interesting aromas and flavors that hops bring to the table. This is a very good example. It's definitely got a lot of interesting fruit qualities that are coming through both in the aroma and the flavor, and some classic earthy undertones in that herbaceous side, which is really quite nice. It kind of takes away the one-dimensionality of it. It's a very, very nice beer. I'm going to jump in for balance and final thoughts here. It's so bright and fruity. And the bitters really that you get on this one, you get up front with that big burst of flavor. And the burst of flavor lasts for about 3 seconds, and it just nosedives in intensity. And it just kind of plateaus and holds there. Right as it's nosediving, that's when the bitters really come into their own, and they are very subtle. I cannot overemphasize that. It's very subtle. If you crave the bitters, this probably isn't the IPA for you. If you like all of the interesting flavor and aroma characteristics hop bring to the table, which is very commonplace for hazies, New England style IPAs, they don't play as heavily on the bitters. It's not a West Coast style IPA. It's not pretending or trying to be. Completely different IPA drinking experience. But this is very, very well done for what it is. Very, very well done indeed. Very tasty. I'm going to take my time. I'm going to sip on this, come with my scores. When we come back, we will get both beers ranked from top to bottom. Okay, now that we've gotten to enjoy both beers, we're going to get them ranked. Starting with the Pipeworks Brewing Company's Lizard King. This is the pale ale of the bunch. They're based out of Chicago, Illinois, and this one was brewed with Mosaic hops. Starting with the aroma on this beer was very pronounced. It was very pronounced for the style, certainly. Honestly, it was quite a lot more intense than many IPAs that I've experienced. It gets a 9 out of 10. For the taste, very, very enjoyable beer. This was a very big pale ale, and it kind of surprised me how many bitters it had for just the standard pale ale. Normally, they're not quite that bitter forward, but as we know, Mosaic is high alpha acid content hop variety, and they certainly made a point to extract base alphas into the boil. It gets a 9 out of 10. For the body on this was really robust for a pale ale, but it didn't swing on a crazy and like way out of character. It was just a nice full-bodied pale ale for the ABV range. It gets a 10 out of 10. For the mouthfeel, same thing. It had the right amount of resistance. It felt right. It paired perfectly in harmony with the body. It gets a 10 out of 10. For the finish on this beer was very long for a pale ale. Pale ales, normally, okay, if there's a little bit of a hop bite, they'll have a little bit of lingering bitters, but they're not in the same playing field as IPAs. This was very much an exception. This was very, very long. Even though it wasn't the most hop-forward pale ale I've ever had, it's certainly in the top tier, certainly above average. But the bitters that it did produce really did linger on the palate and help extend that finish quite a long bit. Well above average, it gets an 8 out of 10. For the head and retention, this one did a very good job. Certainly well above average. It formed a nice true head, and it stuck around most of the time. It gets an 8 out of 10. For the appearance, this was textbook pale ale. It's what I picture in my head when I think of pale ale. It gets a 10 out of 10. For the balance on this beer was exceptional. They were not shy about the use of hops, and the malt bill was perfectly appropriate for the beer style, and you could taste them both independently. It truly was well balanced. It gets a 10 out of 10. Feeling of the intangible. I really enjoyed this beer. Overall, I really, really did. It didn't lose many points in many categories, and subjectively, I like pale ales, but even though this was hoppier than average, I still like a little more hoppy bite than this one produced, but it didn't miss the mark by much for me subjectively. Give it a 9 out of 10. Finally, as an example of the style, this is just a fantastic pale ale. Very big, very bold, very in your face. Mosaic is a big, bold hop, and they did a great job with it. Gets a 9 out of 10, which brings the total score on Pipeworks Brewing's Lizard King to a 92 out of 100. So well above average. If you're a fan of pale ales, especially more hop-centric ones, this is definitely one to seek. Well worth your time. Moving on to beer number 2. This is Fort George Brewery's Crysknife, the IPA of the bunch, stepping it up a tier. 7.2% ABV on this one. They are based out of Astoria, Oregon, and this one was brewed with a blend of Amarillo, Azacca, Cashmere, Citra, and Mosaic hops. So one in common. Starting with the aroma. The aroma on this beer was very big, very pronounced. You could smell all sorts of classic hop aromas come through, and in good pungency. Had very fresh, fruity sense about it overall. Really enjoyed it. It gets an 8 out of 10. For the taste, I enjoyed the taste of the beer fine, but honestly, the flavors were not anywhere near as pungent as the aroma, and this compared to just the standard pale ale of the review, not even the same ballpark. This was far weaker in terms of flavor. Now, what I did taste tasted very good. It tasted very fresh, had an interesting mix of flavors. They were just muted. And really, for an IPA, there was just the slightest hint of bitters, but nothing that screams, oh yeah, I'm drinking an IPA here. Said it's wholly average. It gets a 5 out of 10. For the body on this beer was very nice, very robust, certainly for the style and for sure for the ABV. It gets a 10 out of 10. Mouthfeel, similar story. Had a wonderful, viscous mouthfeel with a lot of resistance. It got very creamy when you agitated it around the palate. Felt bigger than it was for this ABV range. It gets a 10 out of 10. For the finish. The finish was one of the categories that kind of disappointed me the most. IPAs are known for their longer finishes because those lingering bitters, but the flavor profile in this beer was so weak and the bitters were so tame. It just didn't have that long of a finish at all. This was below average. It gets a 3 out of 10. Head and retention. This beer did a great job at home. I'm sure it would be even better on a tap. It gets a 9 out of 10. Appearance. This was a classic hazy IPA, and it was very hazy, very lovely, bright, almost orange juice in color. It gets a perfect 10 out of 10. For the balance. The balance on this beer was a tricky category for me. I liked what I did experience in terms of aroma and flavor. The problem was it was just so tame, so muted. There wasn't enough intensity to it, and then almost a complete absence of bitters. Yeah, I would go back to the drawing board on the balance of this. Even if you're making, a hazy that's accentuating fruit, just the flavors, they weren't pungent enough. It's a crowded marketplace, and this was low end of average. It gets a 4 out of 10. Feeling in the intangible. Overall, did I enjoy the beer? Sure, it was fine. Would I actively seek this out to drink again versus trying something new? I wouldn't. Overall, subjectively, I thought it was average. It gets a 5 out of 10. Finally, is an example of the style. Yet again, the hazy IPA and big, fruity, bold, pungent side of the hop characteristics is a crowded marketplace. And in that market, this to me, overall, is squarely average. It gets a 5 out of 10, which brings the total score on Fort George Brewery's Crysknife to a 69 out of 100. So overall, the average score really is in the high end of average, above average territory, but it did lose some big points in some notable categories. So it really just depends on your preference. If you really like a tamer IPA, very, very tame, even if you're going for the hazy style that accentuates the fruit and very minimal to no bitters, this would be worth consideration, but it does not have that pungent of a flavor to it. So yes, you can taste it, it's there, it's just not very bold. The flavors were very muted, and it could have been so much more in my opinion. But nonetheless, still a beer worth your time, just depends on your personal preferences. Folks, that's today's review. As always, I do sincerely appreciate you tuning in today. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you want to stay in the loop when our videos go live to YouTube, you just click the notification bell icon. It's right next to the subscribe button. Until next time, keep it beer, keep it craft. We'll see you on the next one. Cheers.